Hello, everyone. So I know you guys have a big presentation coming up, and I just wanted to make this short video to give you some guidelines, some tips to help you guys have the most effective presentation possible. So I think one thing that's really important when you're doing a presentation is to have a focus. So I want to go back to why the heck we're doing this presentation in the first place. And that goes back to our course objectives and student learning outcomes. And again, these are in the syllabus and they should be for every course that you take to kind of explain to you, like, this is what you're supposed to get out of this class overall. And all of the projects, assignments, everything that you do in class should relate back to your objectives and outcomes. So this particular project fulfills the following. First of all, one of our objectives was to define and illustrate various cost terms and concepts and evaluate their relevancy for different decision-making purposes. And I hope that this project will give you a chance to kind of reflect on all of the different terms that we learned in this class. We learned a lot of different terms and concepts. And we talked about how they can help businesses make better decisions. So that's the whole point of this project, is to reflect on everything, all the terms and concepts we learned and how they help managers make decisions. The second thing that this project fulfills is our student learning outcome, which is to present an oral presentation in the designated subject area. So again, that student learning outcomes means by the end of this class, you should be able to do this. This is your outcome, and that's the oral presentation. So that's why I have this presentation assigned. General presentation guidelines, it should be 10 to 15 minutes in total. I recommend that you time yourselves as a group to make sure that you stay within that range. Depending on how tight the class is, I'm going to be pretty strict. I'm definitely going to be strict on the 10-minute end. It may not be less than 10 minutes, but depending on how tight the class is, if the class is really tight and we have a lot of presentations to do in a short amount of time, I'm going to be super strict on the 15 minutes and I may have to cut you off. So make sure that you time yourselves and that you know how long you're going to take. Each person must speak at least 2 minutes. And each person must discuss at least one managerial accounting topic. So your 2 minutes can't just be on fluff like history of the company or something like that. It's got to be about a managerial accounting topic that we discussed in class. Now, you don't have to cover everything that we did in the project. In fact, I think that would be impossible to do that in 10 to 15 minutes. So instead, I want you to choose which concepts you want to discuss in your presentation. Now, a couple things to consider are: choose the concepts that you think are most interesting. What was interesting to you as you were doing the project? What do you think would be most interesting for your audience to see? The second thing to consider is you want to choose topics that you understand. Okay, so if there were certain topics that you struggled with, that you didn't really understand, don't choose those to present on, because you're not going to feel comfortable up there talking about something if you don't understand it. So pick something that you understand, and hopefully there were enough concepts in there that were kind of more basic that you can speak to. Don't choose the most complex things unless you want to and you find them interesting and you feel that you can explain them well. Now, again, having a purpose or knowing your purpose clearly, I think, is so important when you're doing a presentation, so that you stay focused and you can also help keep your audience focused. If you don't know the purpose of your presentation, your audience definitely is not going to know the purpose of your presentation. So the purpose of all of your presentations is to show how managerial accounting is useful in real life. So every step along the way in this, when you're doing your presentation, I want you to focus on that purpose. And I'm going to kind of explain to you how you can incorporate that throughout your presentation. Now, your presentation should have a clear format: intro, body, and conclusion. I'm sure this is not the first time you've heard this with other presentations or papers or anything that you do. And the reason for this format is A, to help keep you organized, and B, to help keep your audience focused on what your point is. You can never reiterate your point enough. to get it across. Believe me, I know this as a teacher because I'll say the same thing over and over and over again and I still have students messed up. But you really want to make your point clear. So this intro, body, and conclusion is in order to illustrate this concept of communicating with your audience. First, you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them. Then you tell them. Then you tell them what you told them. And hopefully by reiterating your point those 3 times in the intro, body, and conclusion, your audience will actually grasp your point, I hope. So let's first talk about the introduction. For the introduction, you want to hook your audience, just like this guy is hooking a fish. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You want to make it interesting, capture their attention right away. So you may want to start with some kind of a fun fact about your company that you think your audience would like. You could talk about why you chose your company. Do you have a personal connection? Did you work there or know someone who worked there or have a fascination with their products or whatever it is? Sometimes that's interesting to even just know why you chose a company. You could also maybe start with a short video clip, but again, use your discretion there. I try to make your videos no more than 1 minute because then when videos are too long, it can kind of detract from your presentation. The second thing you want to do with your introduction is to state the purpose of your presentation. And again, like we talked about, the purpose of your presentation is to explain how managerial accounting is useful to your company. Then you're going to share how you're going to prove that managerial accounting is useful to your company and give just like a very brief agenda of the evidence that you're going to present to prove your point. So here's an example of a slide that you might see. Okay, you would say, after you do your hook and you say, the purpose of this presentation is to show you how managerial accounting is useful in real life. And we're going to show you how it's useful to our company because it helps determine product cost. It helps them identify standard cost variances. It helps them make sales mix decisions. And it helps them make capital budgeting decisions. Now again, you don't have to use these 4. You can choose any 4 that you want. Anything that you found most interesting or that you feel most comfortable talking about. But it kind of helps your audience if you give them an idea of what you're going to be presenting, and that helps kind of keep them focused and they know to look for these things in your presentation. So then once your introduction is done, you've told them what you're going to tell them. Now you tell them, and that is the body of your presentation. And your body is when you actually present the evidence. Now, so I got my little FBI guy here gathering evidence. But when you present your evidence, I want you always to kind of go back to your purpose and explain how it's useful to your company. So for example, if you're going to talk about CVP analysis, you can explain what CVP analysis is, but then I want you to go back and explain how CVP analysis is useful to the company. How would the company use it to benefit them? So always go back to that purpose of this presentation, how it's useful to your company. Then once you presented all your evidence, you can conclude your presentation. Now the conclusion is when you tell them what you told them. So you briefly summarize your evidence and you restate your purpose. After presenting all of our evidence of how the company uses managerial accounting for CVP analysis and product cost and capital budgeting decisions, it is clear from the evidence that we presented that managerial accounting is useful in real life. Something along those lines. But again, just reiterate how managerial accounting is useful. And you can even make this kind of personal to yourself. Go, we've learned lessons from this. Someday when we become managers, we're going to do XYZ, whatever it is. But show again how managerial accounting is useful, how this project helped you realize that. Now, as far as your actual slides go, I want to give you some tips there, do's and don'ts. So I know a lot of times students want to put like all of their information on the slide, as if the slide is going to do the presentation for them. But please, please, please don't do that. I don't want you to put too many words or numbers on your slides or use your slides to speak for you. The problem with putting too much information on your slides is when you do that, it actually distracts your audience from what you're saying. So either they're going to start trying to read the slide and then they won't hear what you're saying, or they're going to be listening to what you're saying and not read the slide at all. So all that work you put into putting all those words on a slide is useless because they're not looking at it anyway. Or they're going to try to do both at the same time, and which is impossible. You cannot read and listen at the same time. So don't do that. Instead, so let me show you kind of what I mean, an illustration, right? So let's say that you want to talk about a lawsuit that Apple has. And here you see this slide that has all of these words on it. Well, no one's going to read that during your presentation. So instead, do something like this. This slide. Image says Apple versus the FBI. It kind of leads your audience to know what you're going to talk about. It anchors them. They're like, okay, now I know that they're going to be talking about an Apple lawsuit with the FBI. But that's it. I read it for a second. I see that. And I don't have to look at it anymore. Now I can start listening to what the speaker is saying. So do use your slides to support what you're saying, but use keywords, numbers, or short phrases only. Okay? Use images. Images are really powerful and help, again, keep your audience anchored. You can consider maybe using some simple graphs or charts to relay your information, because that's very visual as well. And sometimes simple graphs or charts actually help your audience to visualize. So for example, if you're talking about a sales forecast, that sales are increasing, instead of writing sales increasing on your slide, you could show a chart that shows, the sales increasing. That could be helpful. But I also want you to make sure that you pay attention to the color and font size that you use on your slides and make sure that it's readable. And when you're doing your presentation, really keep your audience in mind. Make it interesting for your audience. What kind of slides would you want to see? Would you want to see a slide with a bunch of boring words on it, or would you want to see some images? So pretend you are your audience. What kind of presentation would you like to watch? And tailor your presentation to your audience.